Hey guys, welcome to our Friday video. Today we're looking at a mainboard processor and RAM bundle. So we've got a LGA 2011 motherboard, we've got a 8-core 16-thread processor and also a dual channel memory kit with 16 gigabytes of memory. And I had a look at the prices. I bought all of this for around $160. Prices can fluctuate a little bit, but the value is definitely there. Now, this isn't a perfect system. The mainboard has a few disadvantages, which I will point out, but I have been using this system to do some 4K video editing, so I know it works fairly well, but we will focus on games, of course. We have a few other benchmarks, and we also look at power consumption. So let's have a look at the CPU. It is the Xeon E5 2650V2. Built on the 22 nanometer process with the Ivy Bridge generation. 3 gigahertz is the all-core turbo clock speed. We've got a whopping 20 megabytes of level 3 cache. And the integrated DDR3 memory controller can handle up to 1866 megahertz of DDR3 registered ECC memory. It also takes desktop RAM, and we will talk about that later in the video. And this is the LGA 2011 mainboard, and there has been a little bit of a price breakthrough. Rather than spending $70 or $80, you can get such mainboards now for around $50. There are a few things to watch out for, however. This is the box that the mainboard came in, and included is an I/O shield. We're getting a SATA cable and also one of these fan adapters. They work great with AMD compatible tower coolers. At the back of the mainboard we have two PS2, 8 USB 2 and gigabit Ethernet and also audio ports. So on this mainboard, no USB 3. There are versions of this mainboard for a little bit more, around $10 more. Some of them come with USB 3. Some of them also have M.2 NVMe. This one does not, so I managed to find the cheapest and the most bare bone version of this mainboard. We've got a PCI Express 3.0 16x slot for your video card here, and there's also a 1x slot. Now for this project, because we don't have USB 3, I tried one of these USB 3 PCI Express controllers. That worked fine, but you have to watch out a little bit which video card you're using. This can block some of the airflow. However, I'm using a reference Radeon 5700, which has the blower type cooler. So in this case, there's no blocking of airflow going on here because the fan sucks air from the rear. So that's just something to keep in mind when you consider getting a USB 3 PCI controller. So here we have the LGA 2011 socket. The mainboard has VRAM cooling and the temperatures are fairly decent. I tested with a thermal probe and they were within reasonable limits. Now this mainboard has only got dual channel memory support. Although we have 4 RAM slots, it will only run in dual channel configuration. If you're using 2 memory slots, they go into the green slots first. So if you put them into the black ones, the mainboard will not post. So if you have two modules, they go into the green ones. If you have 4, you populate all of them. On this implementation of the mainboard, we do not get any M.2 support here, but there are more expensive variants that have M.2. We get 4 SATA ports. Only the green ones are SATA 3, the black ones are SATA 2. So make sure when you connect a SSD that you plug it into the green ones. The Ethernet and audio solutions are from Realtek. Now let's have a look at some of the headers. CMOS battery is here. Usually this is not included because of shipping regulations. Here goes the front panel audio header. We've got a 3-pin case fan. This is the front panel connector for your case. The black one is the power. Blue one is a reset. Then we've got green with the plus on the left side. That is the HD case LED. And then we've got the red one with the plus on the left. That's for the hard drive activity LED. This is some sort of a diagnostic port. I've been told you can connect a programmer and flash the BIOS this way. 2 USB 2 ports. This is a jumper header for clearing the CMOS, I believe, and here you can connect a PC speaker. The mainboard BIOS is very basic. There's not much you can configure. It does support RAM overclocking though, so you can use 1333 or 1600 MHz RAM and try overclocking it to 1866. If you have an unlocked processor like an i5 1650, 1660 or 1650 V2 or 1660 V2, you can overclock the processor. Should go to around 4.2 GHz. That's the limit of the BIOS. And also sleep mode does not work. So if you're building a project where you need sleep mode to work, do not buy this mainboard. It simply doesn't work. It just, the screen just goes black, but it will still consume full power. Memory prices are extremely competitive on the 2011 platform because we can use registered ECC DDR3 memory. You can also recycle old DDR3 desktop memory, but if you buy new RAM, go for registered ECC. You're looking at around $45 for a 16 GB kit and around $81 for a 32 GB kit. So this is a 16 GB RAM kit rated at 1866 that worked flawlessly. It got detected straight away and configured for the correct frequency. Now, in past videos, I got asked to test more RAM. So I actually have a quad channel kit. So 4 modules, 8 GB each, that worked just fine. So for a total of 32 GB running at 1866. But I wanted to push it a little bit further. I also have 2 16 GB RAM kits. So the total capacity, I believe, was 48 GB of RAM. That worked fine. But this memory is rated at only 1600 MHz, so I had to go into the BIOS and overclock the RAM to 1866, which also worked flawlessly. So I believe if you buy 2 more of these, you will be able to use a total of 64 GB of memory. For cooling, I'm using this CPU cooler that I got from AliExpress. For heat pipes, it screws directly onto LGA 2011, which I like. 92mm fan, which has a LED. It is not PWM, so it runs at full speed, but it is fairly quiet. You're looking at around $18 for one of these. For storage, I'm using a 2 TB SSD from Crucial. Runs at full speed as long as you connect it to one of the green SATA ports on the mainboard. For the video card, we're going with a Radeon RX 5700. This is my most expensive PC component actually. And I only use this card in order to not have any bottlenecks, to really see what the system, what the processor, what the RAM can do when paired with a powerful video card. This is not the video card I would recommend pairing up with this motherboard bundle. I would look for a Radeon RX 400 or 500, like a 470 or 480 or 570 and 580. And prices have come down, I believe, for $70 to $80. You can get a 4 GB version of such a card. And for 100, 110, 120, you can get an 8 GB version of such a card. And they are perfectly fine for 1080p performance and go really well with this CPU, mainboard and RAM bundle. And we have some power consumption figures. With the Thermaltake 750 watt power supply, the entire system idle, sitting on the desktop, 53 watts, and then running Cinebench R20 with hyperthreading disabled, 105 watts, and with hyperthreading enabled, 117 watts. And now let's have a look at some benchmarks. First up, we got CPU set, and I tested with hyperthreading off and hyperthreading on. With hyperthreading off, we're getting 2481 for the multi-thread score and 303 for the single thread score. Turning on hyperthreading, the multi-thread score boosts to 3086, but the single thread score goes down to 288. So this might be a good indicator that for gaming you want to leave hyperthreading off. This might be a implementation of this mainboard and the BIOS. Moving on to Cinebench R15, 833 with hyperthreading off and 1058 with hyperthreading on. In Cinebench R20 we're getting 1750 with hyperthreading off and 2206 with hyperthreading on. And now let's have a look at some games. Apex Legends and Fortnite is First up, I had huge issues with the internet. I'm not sure what was going on, but I saw severe rubber banding. At 1080p, let's start with Apex Legends. So at 1080p max details, we're getting just over 100 FPS most of the time. And the frame times, yeah, they are a little bit inconsistent. So what you can do to smoothen that out is enable a FPS limiter. So I set it to 60 FPS, and look at that, we're getting perfect frame times. The FPS is constant, the frame pacing is also consistent. So on a machine like this, and in general, I believe using an FPS limiter is a good way to make sure that the performance, the FPS is not only high, but you're getting consistent frame times and a silky smooth experience. Fortnite is a game where usually you see a lot of stutters and skips, especially at the beginning of the game. Once on the ground, we're seeing over 100 FPS, and that is with all details maxed out. Apex Legends, also everything is maxed out. In Fortnite, we're using epic details. I tried once again to enable a FPS limit at 60 FPS, and then also in one of the comments, someone said to turn off MSI Afterburner, so I did that. And yeah, we don't get the frame times on the screen anymore. But the subjective experience is that this made a difference. It seems to be a lot smoother now. So yeah, try using an FPS limiter if you feel like the game skips and judders too much. Now let's have a look at some games that are well optimized using the Vulkan API. Doom, high details, we're getting around 200 FPS, which I believe is the limit of the engine. So silky smooth experience, and this is what games should look like. Optimization and really taking advantage of your video card and having low CPU overhead. Strange Brigade, we're seeing similar performance. We're running that game also with high details. All the games in this video are tested with high details, and these games use the Vulkan API, which runs perfectly fine. Once again, we're getting around over 200 FPS. And we tested another game with the Vulkan API, Wolfenstein 2. Also over 200 FPS, so another game that runs silky smooth on this machine thanks to the Vulkan API and optimization for CPUs that are not that strong. Next up, we got Shadow of the Tomb Raider, which takes advantage of many cores and threads. In this scene, we're getting just over 100 FPS, but keep in mind that the complexity of the levels in Shadow of the Tomb Raider can change, can vary greatly. So this might not be representative for the entire game, but in many areas of the game you will see this sort of performance. In a previous video, I've been asked to include the War Thunder benchmark, which is really easy to do. 121 average and 102 minimum FPS. This is with all the details maxed out. I tried Far Cry 5 and also Far Cry New Dawn. Far Cry 5 runs a little bit better. We're getting over 60 FPS pretty much most of the time. And in Far Cry New Dawn, similar performance, but a little bit lower. Now this might be because the scene has some water going on and water reflections, and that might be more demanding. But it could also be that the game just has nicer graphics. But once again, we're using high details. But Ubisoft games, they are known to not be very well CPU optimized, but still we're getting around 60 FPS, which is pretty impressive for such a budget build. And now we're going to have a look at some retro games. I've been asked to, why don't you just test a few old games quickly and see what performance we're getting. Half-Life 2 runs at around 300 FPS, all details maxed out at 1080p. We've got Quake 2, we're getting 715 FPS at 1280 by 960. Quake 3, we're getting 515 FPS at 1280 by 1024. And lastly, you know what's coming. Does it run Crysis? Here we are with very high details, 1080p. And it runs okay. So once again, this is another machine that struggles with Crysis. It just doesn't hit the 60 FPS all the time. It is playable and smooth most of the time, but just not always. It just simply doesn't have enough gigahertz and enough IPC to run that game well. So guys, what do you think about the performance? I think it's pretty good. For around $160, you get a mainboard, CPU and RAM bundle with a 8-core processor and 16 gigabytes of RAM. And the performance is pretty decent. Of course, It can't compete with like a Ryzen 3600 or whatever Intel's latest equivalent is. That is just not going to happen. But then you're also saving quite a bit of money. Talking about Ryzen, in the past I liked to mention the Ryzen 1600 at this point. However, the prices have gone up on AliExpress. The 1600 was around $60-70 US, but now it's around $100, and that's the slower version. There's a newer version of the 1600. So my recommendation is now to go straight to the 2600. It's around $110-120 US, and the Ryzen 2600 has decent performance. But that is quite a bit more than this CPU, which you can get for around $60 US. A Ryzen mainboard you should be able to get for $50-60 US, so that is comparable. The RAM, you're not gonna get a 16 gigabyte RAM kit for $40-50. I don't think this is gonna happen. Correct me if I'm wrong. Prices in Australia are a little bit different. So yeah, let me know what sort of price you pay for a 16 gigabyte Ryzen kit. I really wish that AMD would launch a 6-core, 6-thread Ryzen CPU for a killer price in Australia, in our market, but it doesn't seem to be happening. So in the meantime, the Xeon LGA 2011 platform is still delivering value to us. So yeah, what is it you have to watch out for? Buying the main board from AliExpress, if something goes wrong, you might be out of luck. I wouldn't rely too much on getting any support. There are no BIOS updates either, no M.2 on my main board, no USB 3, so these are all shortcomings. And an extremely basic BIOS, you won't be able to configure the memory timings, so it's got some hard encoded RAM timings that it locks in when you clock in the RAM at 1866, but there's no support for XMP profile and anything like that. The processor, decent performance, runs cool as well, and for $60 I think it is good value for an 8-core processor. And the RAM is really the highlight of this platform. Cheapest chips. If you want a 32 gigabyte workstation machine, you're looking at around $70-80 US, and that is a pretty good price. And yeah, like I said, for the video card, go with RX 400 or 500 series video card. These are exceptionally good value at the moment. And because we've got a PCI Express 1X slot here, if the card doesn't block your fans of your GPU, you can get a USB 3 controller to plug in your external hard drives. And yeah, that's really it for this video, guys. As always, let me know what do you think of this platform. Keep these suggestions for future videos coming. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. And yeah, share the video with your friends. And I shall see you soon with another one.